By the way, if you've just joined us, I'm speaking with Liz Oyer. She was the former pardon attorney at the Department of Justice. She was just telling us how she was fired when she recommended that Mel Gibson's gun rights were not reinstated after reviewing his case and seeing that he had a history of domestic violence. But after he said that, and I guess Mel Gibson is a friend of the president's or
Right.
whatever, she was basically fired and told to gather her things, and she put them in a grocery bag and left the building. So, and that was really, I mean, we're kind of laughing about it now, but it was incredibly traumatic and upsetting to you, Liz.
You know what, Katie? The grocery bag is in my garage, and I literally haven't opened it since I left the office. It's just been too. I just haven't been able to bring myself to even look through that stuff. It's probably a junk. It's probably stuff I should throw away. There's some pictures and things like that in there, but I just haven't been able to bring myself even to look at it.
So
It were,
I just don't want to, I don't want to minimize how painful this was for you as somebody had worked for the DOJ for how many years, Liz?
I'd been there for 3 years, and I'd been in public service for most of my career for much longer than that. I was a federal employee as a public defender, and then I moved over to the Justice Department because I believe in public service, and I believe that public servants add a lot of value to our country. But currently, they are not being respected or treated as though they add value. And it is a hard time for those who are in those positions. People are under a tremendous amount of pressure. And in the Justice Department, lawyers are being put in positions where they have to choose between their own integrity and satisfying their bosses. People are being asked to make decisions that could cost them their law licenses. And it's really a terrible and stressful time to be working in the Justice Department.
A lot of people have left because
Yeah,
they just don't feel comfortable being in those circumstances, and a lot of people have been fired like you.
that's
Well,
right.
let's talk about the FBI director, James Comey. He has been indicted. This was just days after Donald Trump publicly pressured Pam Bondi to prosecute him and other n- political nemesis. I've never really used the plural of nemesis. It sounds weird. So let's. I'd love you to start from the very beginning. He was charged with 2 indictments by a federal grand jury. When I hear this, I also think people who say grand juries will indict a ham sandwich. But I just am curious if you could first take us through kind of the legal machinations that occurred that resulted in this indictment.
Yeah, Donald Trump has had a vendetta for James Comey for a long time, dating back to when Comey was the FBI director. He was the FBI director who was investigating the Russian interference with the election in 2016, and Donald Trump wanted him to shut down that investigation. He didn't, so Trump fired him in 2017, and he has been very public about his distaste for Comey ever since. So Comey is on Trump's enemies list, which includes a lot of other high-profile folks like the Senator Adam Schiff, like Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who has investigated him, and many others. And he has made it known that he intended, when he came back into office, to use the Justice Department to prosecute his enemies. So what he did here was he instructed very publicly his Attorney General to start bringing these cases as soon as possible. He's unhappy that now, 8 months into his presidency, none of his enemies had actually been criminally charged. And he issued a Truth Social post in which he called on Pam Bondi to start bringing these charges immediately. He referred to some of these folks like Adam Schiff as guilty as hell, and he told his prosecutors to bring the charges. The problem for Trump was that the U.S. Attorney's Office that was investigating this case was run by someone who was made the acting U.S. Attorney under Trump, but whose history was as a career prosecutor in that office. He was a very experienced career lawyer named Eric Siebert.
And
And
he was handling I don't even understand really how the US the US attorneys work. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but he was from the Eastern District of Virginia, right?
That's right. So there are 93 U.S. attorneys in the country, and they oversee different geographic districts. And the U.S. attorney is just a fancy way of saying the chief prosecutor in that particular area. And U.S. attorneys are generally appointed by the president, subject to confirmation by the Senate. So in this district, Eastern Virginia, which is essentially the Washington suburbs of Virginia,
My
that's
hometown.
That's where James Comey lives as well, and that's why he's being prosecuted in that district because of legal requirements around jurisdiction and venue. And I won't get into all those details, but in any event, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is actually Northern Virginia, has jurisdiction over this case, and it's run by this experienced career prosecutor who's been in the department for many, many years. And so he knows very well what the norms are, what the rules are, and when it's appropriate to bring charges and when it's not. And he believed that it was not appropriate to bring charges against James Comey. He believed that there was not a factual or a legal basis to seek an indictment. And he ended up being forced out of office because Donald Trump wanted James Comey to be charged. This was just about a week ago. It was a week ago today, actually, that the U.S. attorney had to step down.
This is the same guy, by the way, who was in charge of investigating Letitia James, right? Or Letitia James, however she pronounced Tish James. Let's just leave it at that. So why was he doing that? Because she lives in New York. I'm just curious about that.
That's a good question, Katie. Likely because of the location of a property that's at issue in the case. So usually cases can be brought in multiple different districts. There just has to be some tie to a specific judicial district. So in the Comey case, he actually could have been charged in D.C. because he's now charged with making statements in a congressional proceeding that took place in D.C. But I think the Justice Department made the calculation that they would have a better, more favorable jury and grand jury in Virginia, so they chose to pursue the case there.
Okay, so tell me how this grand jury indicted Comey on 2 counts, and at the same time, this other guy determined there wasn't enough evidence. How did those two things coincide?
So, the way a grand jury works is prosecutors have to present evidence to a group of citizens and they vote on whether to bring charges. That group of citizens is called a grand jury. It's very different from a regular jury that we see sitting in a trial for a couple of reasons. One is only a majority of the grand jurors have to vote to bring the charges. It doesn't need to be unanimous. Um, Two is the standard of proof is very low. They only have to find a preponderance of evidence, which is much lower than proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is actually required to convict someone.
Right.
And three, and this is a really big one, a grand jury is really just a tool of prosecutors. They get to say and do whatever they want in front of the grand jury, and there is no defense presented. The defendant, the person they're investigating, is not entitled to rebut the evidence. They're not entitled to make their own case. They're not entitled to present a defense. They're not even entitled to be in the room. There's also no judge in the room. It is literally just a prosecutor presenting whatever information they want to put in front of the grand juror to try to persuade them to bring a case. So indictments are often returned because the prosecutor pleads their case and there's no other information heard, and there might be more facts that if the grand jurors knew them, they wouldn't bring an indictment.
So who would have been the prosecutor who brought this case before the grand jury, Liz?
Well, that's a really interesting part of this story, Katie. So this experienced prosecutor, Eric Siebert, was forced out last Friday because he didn't even want to take the case to a grand jury. He
Right.
said, I'm not even doing that. So he was forced out of office and he was replaced with a woman named Lindsay Halligan. Lindsay Halligan is an insurance lawyer. She has no experience as a prosecutor. She's never worked in the Justice Department, but her main qualification is that she was one of Donald Trump's personal lawyers in the past, and so he trusts her to be loyal to him. So he installed Lindsay Halligan into this position of U.S. Attorney and said, go indict James Comey. And she got a memo from her subordinates, from the career lawyers still in the office saying, we don't think you should do this. We don't think the facts and the evidence support it. We don't think you should bring these charges. And she went ahead and did it anyway. And what's so remarkable about this is it's now being reported this morning by the New York Times that she, Lindsay Halligan, personally presented the case to the grand jury herself, which suggests that she couldn't get anyone else in the office to do it. The U.S. attorney is like the boss of the whole office. So they're not the one that's going to court. They're not the one that's going to present evidence to the grand jury. The fact that she did this is really extraordinary and suggests that nobody else on the career workforce, and by the way, that's hundreds of people, was willing to do this.
So this timeline is super important. So this happened after Eric Siebert was fired or
That,
resigned.
that's
Was
right.
he fired or did he resign?
Well, he was reported to have resigned, and then Donald Trump said, no, no, he didn't resign. I fired him. And we haven't gotten to the bottom of what exactly happened there, but either way, he was clearly forced out in some manner.
So how obviously I think you've already answered this question, but just to clarify, how unconventional is it for this woman to have no background in this kind of work and to be in a position where she is going before the grand jury? Both of those things are highly, highly unusual.
You know what? The only time that I'm ever aware of anything like that happening before is under Donald Trump. It's actually happened a few times in the Trump administration. Typically, a U.S. attorney is an experienced prosecutor who has come up through the ranks of the U.S. attorney's office, knows what they're doing, and then, moves into a leadership position. They don't come in from the outside without any knowledge of how federal criminal proceedings work. It's really a complicated area of law. There are particular rules and procedures that lawyers have to follow to keep their law licenses, to be in compliance with what the court requires. So it's not something that you can just drop into and figure out on the fly. But Donald Trump has been throughout the country installing political loyalists who have no experience into U.S. attorney jobs so that they can pursue his political vendettas. We've seen the same thing very prominently in New Jersey, where he installed Alina Habba, who again was one of his personal lawyers. She became a lawyer for Donald Trump because she was a member of his golf club and somehow struck up a relationship with him and became one of his lawyers. And she wasn't a criminal lawyer at all, but she became the U.S. attorney in New Jersey, and now she's brought the prosecutions against the representatives who were protesting at the ICE facility on behalf of Donald Trump. And we're seeing this in Los Angeles, where Donald Trump has picked a U.S. attorney who is doing his bidding there. We're really seeing a lot of very unusual appointments of U.S. attorneys under Donald Trump, people who really have no relevant qualifications for the job, but the only qualification he cares about is loyalty to him.
So now that James Comey has been indicted, right? First of all, do you know what he was charged with?
Yes. So he was charged in a 2-count indictment. It's being reported that 3 counts were presented to the grand jury, but they only returned an indictment on 2 of them, meaning they rejected one of the charges and they accepted 2 of them. The 2 charges are making a false statement to Congress and obstruction of Congress. Those both relate to a statement that Comey made when he testified to Congress in 2022, in September of 2022. So this is almost exactly 5 years after the fact that he's being prosecuted for those statements. The reason for that is the Justice Department was coming up on what's called the statute of limitations. You only have 5 years after a crime occurs to bring charges under certain laws, and this is one of those. So they run out of time in just a couple of days. So they rushed to return this indictment under the wire for the statute of limitations, which relates back to some statements in Comey's congressional testimony in September of 2020. The statements that he made were about whether he authorized a leak of some certain information to the media related to the Russia investigations. He says he didn't authorize this leak. There was testimony from another FBI official, Andrew McCabe, at some point that suggests maybe Comey did authorize the leak. It seems like a very minor point, and the factual record is quite in dispute, but nevertheless, the Trump administration is using this as the basis for a federal indictment, which is really pretty striking. These are pretty low-level charges as far as
Yeah.
federal crimes occur. The maximum penalty is 5 years in prison, but they're the type of charges where, even if convicted, the likely sentence would be probation.
Okay, let me ask you another dumb question. By the way, if anybody watching has dumb questions, don't be embarrassed. This is the place for dumb questions. So, I mean, he authorized a leak, right, according to Andrew McCabe, right? And let's
Right.
say Jim Comey lied, right? When he was testifying in front of Congress about authorizing that leak. Liz, dumb question. I mean, he shouldn't have really authorized that leak, should he have? I mean, and then if he did, should he have lied about authorizing the leak? I'm not saying these are huge offenses, but can you just help me understand why that's not a big deal?
Well, so we're kind of assuming that by calling it a leak in the first place, it suggests that there was something improper about it. We don't
Right.
even
Yeah.
know that that's the right terminology because, as director of the FBI, Comey does have broad discretion to decide what information should be shared with the press and what shouldn't. So,
Right.
um,
Okay. So authorize the release. Let's say that.
yes. So authorize the release is a better way of saying it because we're not talking about classified information or national security information that is subject to separate statutes. If he had disclosed classified information, there would be a whole set of additional and more serious charges. So that's not
Right.
what this is about. It's just did he or did he not authorize this information to be shared with the press? And authorizing information to be shared with the press would be well within his purview as the director of the FBI. He's the highest ranking official in that agency. But that's not to say that James Comey is necessarily a flawless human. There are many legitimate criticisms that people have about how he conducted himself. People on both sides have grievances with James Comey. He's sort of a controversial person, but that doesn't mean that he committed a crime in this context. And it sounds like the career employees of the Justice Department did not believe that there was evidence to establish that he committed a crime, but he's been charged with a crime nevertheless.
Why do you think, again, I sound like I work for Fox News. I don't, everybody, but why would he say in front of Congress, I didn't do that when he did?
Well, I don't think it's established that he did. I mean, he maintains that he didn't, and there's a different version of events that another official has provided.
Andrew McCabe.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrew McCabe, yeah. So, I don't know what the truth of the matter is, frankly, Katie, and I don't wanna weigh in on what
Right.
the facts are, I just don't know, but I will say there are a couple of legal requirements to prove that a crime was committed. One is that Comey has to have known that his statement was false, so then there has to have been an intent to deceive Congress. And two is the statement has to have been material. So that means it has to have had the potential to influence the decision of a body to which it was said. So it has to have been something that could have influenced Congress. And it's not clear that that was the case here. I mean, even if the statement was false, did it influence Congress in any way? I'm not sure that that could readily be proven. The idea is like charging someone with a crime. It's not about a gotcha thing. If, you're asked, what did you have for breakfast? And you had a bagel, but you forgot that and you said you had cereal. That's not a crime. It's, because that's not material. It doesn't matter to anybody really. So that's sort of the issue here is was this actually a statement of enough substance that it rises to the level of being a federal crime? I think that's pretty dubious. We'll see what happens when the case is tried in front of a jury. But I also suspect that there are going to be a lot of preliminary motions filed and a lot of litigation about whether these charges can even proceed because of some of the background noise and the publicity that has been generated by Donald Trump over
Well,
these charges.
yeah, Liz, let's talk about that because I was listening to pundits last night talk about like selective prosecution, or I can't remember the word that was used, but something like a vitriolic or a
Yes,
what? Yeah,
vindictive.
vindictive. Thank you,
Yeah.
a vindictive prosecution. So clearly based on. Well, explain what selective and vindictive prosecution means.
Yeah. So the issue with this case is that Donald Trump has made it very public that he wants revenge against James Comey. And it is now very clear that that is what led to this prosecution. The prosecution didn't happen in the ordinary course. The lawyers who were entrusted with handling it thought no charges should be brought. And Donald Trump swooped in and said, no, bring charges. So that raises some legal questions. And There are two motions that I would expect to be filed. One would be about polluting the jury pool. I think that Donald Trump's statements could arguably be said to deny Comey the opportunity for a trial in front of an impartial jury, because Donald Trump has made it so clear that he believes Comey is guilty. He's said over and over again, Comey's a bad guy, he's a scumbag, he's corrupt, he's a bad cop. So the question then is, with all of that being said, can Comey even get a fair trial, or has Donald Trump just so corrupted the jury pool that he can't? And then the other question is this what's called a selective or vindictive prosecution? Is this prosecution being pursued for improper purposes and outside the ordinary scope of the prosecutorial function? That is a legal argument that is very hard to make, and it's very, very rarely successful in federal court. But if there is any case where there is a clear factual record for vindictive or selective prosecution, this would be it. This is a case where the president has just made it so clear that this is a grudge match. This is a revenge prosecution. This is his way of seeking justice for himself, not for the American people, which is the purpose of the Justice Department. And so I'm sure that his lawyers will file a motion to dismiss the case based on those considerations.
Comey's.
Yes, Comey's
Yeah.
lawyers, yes. And I'm sure the Justice Department will oppose that motion and fight vigorously to pursue the prosecution. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. The case is in front of a judge named Michael Nachmanoff.
Oh, good, because I was going to ask you who's going to decide whether this goes to trial or not.
Well, Judge Nachmanoff will be the one who decides whether to dismiss the case or whether to allow it to proceed to a trial in the first instance. He is a longtime public defender. He is formerly the chief federal public defender in the district where he's now a judge, and he's somebody that is respected, reasonable, competent, and undoubtedly will carefully consider the legal arguments that are made. He won't have the last word. There will be undoubtedly there'll be an appeal from either side. If he dismisses the charges, the Justice Department will appeal, and if he grants, and if he doesn't dismiss the charges, then Comey and his legal team will appeal, and then the case will go to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and then potentially even to the Supreme Court. So the Eastern District of Virginia it's known as the rocket docket because it usually decides cases very quickly, but because of the complex legal issues presented here and the likelihood of multiple appeals, it could take a while before we get a final resolution of this case.
Let's say it does go to trial. I know that Jim Comey responded in a video post on social media. He said, "My heart is broken for the DOJ, Department of Justice," he said, "but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system and I'm innocent. Let's have a trial." So if this does go to trial, what is that going to look like? And you were saying, could he get a fair trial, right?
Yeah, so the first thing that would happen in a trial proceeding would be jury selection, and that involves the court sending out notices to members of the community, people who live within the Eastern District of Virginia, to come in for jury duty, and those people will all be questioned by the court and by the lawyers about
Right.
whether
The
they've heard.
voir dire process, right?
Yes, exactly, voir dire. And they'll be questioned about whether they've heard any pretrial publicity about the case, whether they've been influenced by anything they've heard or read, and they will be questioned extensively about the statements that Donald Trump has made about this prosecution and whether they can be fair and impartial. So if the case proceeds to trial, jury selection will likely take a very long time. If the judge determines that there is a possibility of a fair trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, it will still be a lengthy and complex process to even select those 12 jurors who will hear the case, because there has been so much publicity and so much prejudicial publicity coming from the president. I mean, the president has essentially prejudged the facts of the case. He has effectively said that Comey is guilty, and he's put that
He's
into the
written
public
as
domain.
much on Truth Social, right?
Yes, yes. And he's made it clear that, there's not even an open question about his guilt. So that's very problematic. And for that reason, the Justice Department typically does not speak publicly about ongoing prosecutions, because they don't want to prejudice their case by polluting the jury and baking in problems like that. But they have no control over what Donald Trump does or says, and he's just going off on his own,
He
really
says there will be
compromising.
he says there will be others, right?
He does, yeah, and he's made clear who some of those folks are on his list: Letitia James, Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve Board governor, who he's seeking to oust from her job. He thinks maybe prosecuting her will get her out of her job. So he's got a long list of enemies.
Any way to put the brakes on this, Liz? Or I mean, it's so scary because obviously he's using the DOJ for retribution and retaliation and, you know, making a mockery really out of the rule of law, right? According
Yeah.
to many people. So, but I guess the justice system, right, that Jim Comey talks about that he has faith in, that's the only way that this plays out, right? There's no other way to say, hey, this is not your, the DOJ are not your personal lawyers. You can't sick them on anyone that you feel has done you wrong.
Well, the real remedy will lie with the jurors who ultimately decide this case. Assuming the case goes to trial, it's going to be up to the citizens to decide whether to convict James Comey. And we've seen in other parts of the country that some cases that have been brought by the Justice Department even have not been indicted by the grand jury. In DC, there have been a number of cases where grand jurors have refused to even return an indictment, despite the fact that the bar for an indictment is very low. We've also seen that in Los Angeles. And those are citizens essentially exercising their power to say no, to put some brakes on what the Justice Department is doing. We didn't see that in the Eastern District of Virginia. The grand jury did return an indictment. So this will ultimately fall to the jury, what's also sometimes called the petit jury. And that will be a group of 12 citizens and usually two alternates who will hear all of the evidence. And to convict James Comey, they will have to find that the government has proved him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So they'll have to prove that he made statements that were in fact false, that he knowingly made false statements, that those statements were material to Congress. And they'll have to prove all of that to the satisfaction of 12 jurors who will have to unanimously agree to convict him.
But I think some people are outraged that it's even got to this point, right? That it's
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to, and they're, but there's, you say the jury, but there's some people who are like, this is wrong. It should not be going to a jury, right?
It is wrong, and it really is costly to be subject to a prosecution. Even if you're ultimately acquitted, just the financial and emotional and physical toll of going through a criminal prosecution is immense. It is enormous. And so James Comey is being punished just by being put through this prosecution. And that's something that Donald Trump seems to be delighting in. That makes him happy, but it's not an appropriate use of our justice system. And it is really, truly, fundamentally un American, Katie. It is un American to use our justice system in this way to pursue personal grudges and vendettas.
It's just so gross, honestly. And I know that I was reading today. I mean, James Comey's daughter was fired, right? And
Yeah.
his son-in-law resigned in protest after this indictment. So this is like a whole family thing, right? Tell us about the role his daughter and son-in-law play in all this.
So his daughter was a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, where Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were charged. And Jeffrey Epstein died before he went on trial, but Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter, prosecuted the case against Ghislaine Maxwell and was the lead prosecutor at trial. She was fired several weeks ago, and right before Todd Blanche, who is the number two official at the Justice Department, went to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell. You might remember that Blanche was sent to this prison in Florida where Maxwell was serving her sentence
Right. And then
to
they put
talk
her
to
in a
her.
less secure facility. And obviously there's some quid pro quo going on that we don't know
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there was no explanation given for Maureen Comey's firing at the time, but It seems that she was fired because she knew too much about the actual facts of the Ghislaine Maxwell Jeffrey Epstein case, and they
Why
wanted to
doesn't
get
she do
her.
an interview with us, Liz?
You should absolutely interview her, Katie. I mean, I can think of no better person to do it than you.
But probably because I don't really understand anything about the law, maybe. But she would certainly. I mean, she has a story to tell, doesn't she? Would she?
For
What would
sure.
happen to her if she talked and put this out in the public sphere?
I hope she will. It would obviously bring more scrutiny to everything she's saying, and it would put her under a spotlight that she's not currently. She was fired. It was a big deal for a couple of days, and now it's sort of faded behind other news stories. And if she were to speak out, there would be more of a spotlight on her. But I believe that more people who are removed from positions of the Justice Department should be speaking out about what's happening there, educating the American public about the damage that's being done to one of our most important institutions, and helping to fight against the destruction of our democracy. So I hope that she will decide at some point to speak out.
Well, if
She's
you know how to
suing.
reach her, let me know because I would love to talk to her, and maybe we'll get on the case right after that. What about the son-in-law?
So I don't know too much about him other than that he sent a resignation letter to this new U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, saying that he felt that, consistent with his duty to uphold the Constitution, he had to resign from his position as a prosecutor.
But shouldn't he have recused himself from the case if he's Jim Comey's son-in-law?
Undoubtedly, he wouldn't have been working on the case, but I would imagine that it's very hard to even be working in the office under a boss who is actively prosecuting your father-in-law.
What a shit show, right, Liz? Okay, wait, before we go, you made a video about Ed Martin and you called him one of the most dangerous people in America. He is your replacement as the pardon attorney at DOJ. Why are you so concerned and worried about this guy?
Yeah, I'd really like to ask anyone who's watching to please check out my video about Ed Martin on Instagram or TikTok. He is a sort of a figure flying under the radar who is doing a huge amount of damage inside the Justice Department. He has two important portfolios. One is he's the pardon attorney. So he is in charge of essentially dispensing pardons as favors to MAGA loyalists and supporters of the president. And two, he is the director of the Weaponization Working Group, which is the group that is trying to dig up dirt on Trump's political enemies and bring prosecutions against people like Letitia James and Lisa Cook and Adam Schiff.
Is it
He's
really called
extensive.
is it really called the Weaponization
It
Working
is
Group?
really called that, Katie. And he is a very bizarre person. He did a staged photo op in front of Letitia James's home in his trench coat to sort of call attention to himself and his investigation of her. He is trying to get some fame and I think accolades from the president by carrying out his vengeance agenda, and he's got a lot of power. He's sort of in charge of both the punishment lever of the weaponization piece and the rewards lever with the pardons. And he also has some very extreme fringe associations. He has a very checkered past. He is a big booster of the January 6th contingent. He is a conspiracy theorist. He has ties to Russian state media. He's just a lot in his past. It's
What is
very.
his what kind of lawyer is he? What's his background? I mean, obviously he has some pretty sketchy and scary associations, but is he an insurance lawyer too?
He is not a serious lawyer of any sort, as far as I can tell. He's got no experience with the Justice Department prosecuting. He doesn't really seem to have any serious legal experience. He held a job for a while working for the governor of Missouri, and apparently it's been reported that he destroyed emails illegally in that role, which led to an investigation that cost taxpayers $2 million. He then went on to lead an organization called the Eagle Forum, which was founded by Phyllis Schlafly. It's a very ultra conservative, sort of anti women's rights organization. And he was fired from that organization and then sued for defamation. He was found guilty of defamation. He was held in contempt of court. All sorts of bad things that have dotted his record throughout his professional career, yet he failed up and he landed this very powerful position in the Justice Department. He was originally slated to become the U.S. attorney for D.C. And the Republicans in the Senate found that he was too controversial to confirm him for that role. So instead, he landed these other two jobs, which give him a ton of power. He's very dangerous and scary. And I think that because the Republicans are already skeptical of him, there is a chance that we could get Ed Martin ousted from those roles if people pay attention and ask their reps to really demand his resignation. So I want to just encourage folks to watch that video and to try to do what they can to raise the alarm about Ed Martin, who's really a very dangerous person and undoubtedly will be behind more of these vindictive prosecutions.
Well, Liz Oyer, gosh, you've given us a lot to think about and talk about and share with people who care about what's going on in this country every day. Another day, another outrage, another crazy thing happening, another executive overreach of the highest order. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you,
As I
Katie.
said, you're doing such a service to people. Thank you for tolerating someone who gets confused about the legal process. I really appreciate it. And let's do this again soon. There's
That would
plenty
be
to
great.
talk about, right?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. It is a very confusing time, and so, everybody's confused, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share some of my knowledge with folks and talk through these really important issues.
And I think we have to keep paying attention, stay vigilant, because I think part of the goal is to exhaust us
Yep,
and make us want to check out. I want to do another interview about what they're doing about birth control in this country, which is really scary too. Treating some forms of birth control like abortion and denying access to a lot of women to birth control and family planning. It's just honestly more and more sounding like The Handmaid's Tale. It's really scary
really.
shit that's going
Yep,
on in
yep.
this country. All right, Liz, thanks again, everyone who watched. I hope this was helpful. I always love hearing from you. Subscribe. Think about being a paid subscriber. I always feel so gross saying that, but it does support our team who put together background information for me when I interview smart people like Liz and reach out to her. And let me know other people that you want me to talk to, other issues you're concerned about. I'm really doing this as in my own way to provide a public service. And Liz, I'm sure you'd love to hear from people as well. Subscribe to Liz because she's really explaining a lot of these legal issues that are in the news. I think that's all. That's all she wrote. Um,
Thanks,
Thank you,
Katie.
Liz, so much.
Bye.
Have a good weekend if you can.
You too.
All right,
Bye,
bye.
everybody.
Bye. Yeah, bye. Well, they have to stop.